Okay, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first meeting of Regrow, Rewild and Recycle. I will learn to say it properly. It's quite a tongue twister. So thank you very much for coming this evening on a warm evening as well. There's plenty of water still to the right of me if anyone needs a bottle of water just to get through the meeting. So if I can just ask first of all about apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Hamidi. And we did have another name, didn't we, as well?
Chris Bunting.
Chris Bunting as well. I apologise for this meeting. Right, thank you. All right. So during the meeting, there will be opportunities to ask questions. People in the room can certainly put their hand up. There are people who are joining us online, so please do raise your hand online as you would in the normal way. Also, if you could please keep muted while you're not speaking. Or if I miss you when you have put your hand up on the on the virtual meeting, then please do shout at me just to let me know. So it should be okay. We should be able to listen to everybody. That's fine. So we just first of all, if there are any urgent matters that we need to consider, I'm not aware of any urgent matters. Any matters to be considered in private. I'm not aware of any matters to be considered in private. We just asked about declarations of interest, if anyone's got any declarations that they want to mention. No, I don't think we have. So we go straight on to our next part, which is we're looking at the panel operations. I think that did you want to introduce any point there? Thank you.
So the report contains the panel's terms of reference and the outline work programme. The panel's asked to consider these and agree them, and included in that is also the proposal for co-opting a representative from Ealing Parks Foundation. We've got here this evening Mr. Paul Carter, who's the chairman of Ealing Allotments Partnership. He's also a trustee of the Ealing Parks Foundation. So Ealing Parks Foundation have yet to nominate, the board has yet to meet and make a nomination formally to us, and that is likely to happen at the next meeting. And the outline work programme includes all the items that the panel is scheduled to consider at each of the remaining 3 meetings over the year. And that will be updated and presented at each panel meeting. It also includes items for site visits, so panel can include and remove items as they see fit over the course of the year.
Right. Thank you very much, Harji. Okay, so all right, so okay, thank you. Yes, so thank you very much for that, Harji. So just thinking about the co-opting for the Ealing Parks Foundation. I think it's actually crucial that we have the Ealing Parks Foundation on board for anyone who really isn't fully aware of the background. What it is that within the council, we did realise before even COVID that we did need more help and support in order to ensure that we looked after our parks properly in these kind of sparsely resourced times. And so the Ealing Parks Foundation was put together, and there's a group of trustees who are just incredible people, the work that they've done during COVID, over the past few years, just ensuring that we will actually move forward with our parks. I was the council trustee on there, although I've now come off of that. But it is very important that we get someone on board from there, because that is utterly fundamental to what we're doing now. Parks foundations have done incredible things across the country in places like Bristol. And so we really need to do the same here in London, and to really move forward and be a leading force in London on how we look after our parks and encourage friends of parks. And so, yes. You want to? Yes, yes. Okay. All right. So at this point, I'll also welcome, apparently he's joined the meeting now, Tony Leach, the Chief Executive of Parks for London, who's one of our other expert witnesses, who's going to be coming forward with an awful lot of helpful information for us as well, and helpful observations. We do need to listen to a lot of outside organisations during the lifetime of this panel, because that's what's going to be very important in order to ensure that we find the information that we need in order to find the right conclusions and get the recommendations together. Yes, sorry. Sorry. So did you have a point, and Councillor Taylor?
I guess just clarification. Sorry, I didn't get your point about the Ealing Allotments Partnerships, but just looking at the agenda, I'm not trying to cause trouble here. The Ealing Parks Foundation are down as potential expert witnesses in one of the meetings, and I'm just wondering if that's a conflict of interest, effectively being on the panel and then being witnesses. So is that the right way to do it? I think, it just seems a bit of a conflict. We're calling them in as an expert witness as well as being on the panel, even though it's not a jury.
So having spoken to Paul Carter earlier, the likelihood is that Mr. Carter will be the representative. So we will have some continuity, so that just give them an opportunity to contribute to today's meeting and then later on in the year as well.
I clarify that.
Okay,
sorry.
right.
Do you mean he would also be the witness later on?
No, be the co-optee.
He'll be the co-optee.
Panel.
But when you call for an expert witness, it needs to be somebody else on the Parks Foundation rather than him.
So
right. I think then we're going to probably we'll have a discussion about that. We can do that offline, because yes, I think
it's not for a while, but I'm just
yes, yeah, yes, yeah. Mr. Carter, please.
I was just going to say, I mean, although I'm here today as a representative of Ealing Allotment Partnership, I am a trustee of Ealing Parks Foundation. So I'm here, if you like, holding the fort for that organisation today. But I mean, if there's a kind of an issue of conflict of interest, then we've got other people who can come along to represent Ealing Parks Foundation in due course. So I mean, I don't think in practice it's going to be a problem.
No.
Okay, yeah, all right. Sorry, we're having a discussion off the microphones here, so it sounds like a bit of silence there to our audience, but we'll come back on board with that. Okay, so we'll just have to look at that first of all. So would we be agreed in principle that we should have a co-opted member from the Ealing Parks Foundation? There's no actual objections to us doing that, as long as we manage the situation and ensure that the Parks Foundation is in that right position in order to advise us later on. as they need to. Excellent, that's good to know. Right, so and also the other point we need to look at is that you've seen the outline work programme, and so we just wondered if there was any comments that anyone wanted to make off the work programme, what they've read so far. Okay, Councillor Conti, please.
It was just really just thinking about whether we look in one of these in terms, I guess it could fall under any of these categories, but how developments in Ealing impacts on this. So I was just thinking about, I know at the planning meeting last night, what you know, one of the reports about the Manhattan Business Park was mentioned about biodiversity and the impacts on that. And I just wondered whether, you know, obviously the demand for housing, etc., and how that's balanced out through the, you know, in the planning process. I just thought whether that would be something that maybe could fall into looking at sort of the rewilding, etc., and the impact that could have.
Yes, that's a very good point, because one thing we did look at was the built environment with the climate emergency panel that I was chairing in the last municipal year. And so it's something that I do want to see what we can bring into it. I mean, especially when we look at recycling, because one thing I was very concerned about is looking at when we demolish a building, some people get very get quite irate about that, because they say, well, that's not good for the environment, and that's the rubble, etc., is going to go to waste. But we want to look at ensuring that we do actually recycle the materials from that, and then build new buildings which are actually more eco-friendly. So actually, that's the kind of thing that we will want to bring into that. But I think that's but I'm glad that you're actually on board with that, and that's something that we can talk a little bit more then a bit later on as to what we want to bring into it, or unless there's someone's got a particular outside speaker or someone who might be good on that particular subject. Thank you. Councillor Crawford, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether we could consider looking at our housing, social housing estates. In Acton, for example, we have a housing estate, well, two, which have a lot of land around them, very big verges, and basically they're used just solely for dog walkers. And I think it would be, you know, fabulous to have, if there's a waiting list, which we'll look into for allotments, but we could do some rewilding, and also planting of, you know, fruit, fruit, you know, veg, whatever, where we can actually include where the residents can take over and make it a much better environment. Because there's a lot of verges in going to waste. Thank you. And also, I'd like, if we do take that up, to be considered for a site visit, perhaps one or two estates.
Yes, that's a very good idea. I mean, we'll see what comes out of our presentation later this evening from Chris Welsh, to seeing what people are involved with in the local community. But as I say, that's really what the Ealing Parks Foundation has been very much about, trying to get people involved in doing work in their community. But I think it's great to see what kind of input we can put forward and what ideas that we can come forward with the potential site visits. And so, Councillor Taylor, please.
Yeah, I'd probably echo what Councillor Crawford said, actually. I think we looked at this when I was in charge of housing years ago. And I think I had a conversation, visits with Groundwork London back then, about food grown as well, because it's kind of linked to food poverty as well. So it's, you know, potential to look at. So if Chris is on the line, get the message, Chris, about what you present. But yeah, I'd echo that as well.
Yes, Mr. Carter, please.
So just with that in mind, one of the places that would be very good for us to look at, I think, would be Kensington and Chelsea, who've put a lot of effort into community gardens around a lot of their big social estates, you know, around Grenfell Tower and the like. And some of them are successful and some of them are less successful, but it's a really interesting model, I think, and we can learn a lot from not only how they've gone about it, but also how they've engaged with the local communities to try and bring people in to actually make these things continue to work, because it's the maintenance actually that's the kind of critical bit of it, rather than the setting up. So that would be a great place to go, I think, and see it in real action and be able to take the good points from it if we wanted to import something like that into our borough.
Yeah.
Oh, great, thank you for all the contributions there. And that's given us a few notes and a few things to look at. I suppose when we have our pre-agenda meetings, it gives something else to consider and look at. I mean, we do need to really think about as well, just specifically what we're going to be doing for our next meeting, the agenda for our next meeting on Tuesday, 18th of October. We've got the notes there, which you've already got there, which we're going to be looking at the council's biodiversity action plan. So that's the overall item on the agenda that we'll be looking at. And so we have got a list of the expert potential witnesses there, including Ealing Parks Foundation, Ealing Wildlife Group, A. Rocha, Canal and River Trust, and friends of various parks. Also looking at potential site visits for that. And so yes, so I would be agreed that that's really the best thing to really just focus on the biodiversity action plan. And is there any other particular area that we want to look at on top of what's all we've already got noted down there? Oh, Councillor Taylor, please.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to hold the meeting, but I was just thinking about engagement with local communities, to what extent, because I know during the pandemic, for example, Axon Park was used, and I live in a flat. I couldn't make use of it because I was working. Fortunately, everybody else was on furlough enjoying the park. But it is about how much those parks are engaged with different communities across the borough, you know, to what extent, you know, it is kind of used, and thinking about demography as well in that sense.
It's a very good point. I mean, the other thing that we perhaps wanted to do while the weather is still reasonably decent is to look at our site visits. So we do want to do some site visits this time around. We did very little of that last time, last year with the climate emergency panel. But since we're effectively doing the third year of climate emergency, I think it's something that we do need to make up for that now. We have got ideas for site visits down there at Horsenden Hill, especially to look at the harvest and mice, the Greenford to Gurnell, Greenway, Woolfields allotments, Paradise Fields, and Warren Farm. I mean, I don't know if there's any particular preferences that people might have in mind for somewhere they might want us to look into. Obviously, it matters. Well, what does matter is who's actually willing to allow us to take up some of their time to show us around. But I don't know if there's any further ideas on any specific organisations we could talk to or areas we need to look at. Right, I think, Mr. Carter, please.
So I mean, I definitely encourage you to go to one of our top performing allotments in the borough, because they do check a lot of so they're growing places, but they're also increasingly places that are taking lead on biodiversity, you know, working with nature rather than against it. So I mean, I can suggest a couple of allotment sites which where you'll meet a good cross section of people, but also you'll see quite a range of different attitudes, you know, from you know, new opinion formers to people who are more traditional, which is a really good, you know, cross section of people that we've got to work with in order to bring about change.
Thank you. And Councillor Crawford.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. However, I would like to see the less performing allotments, and perhaps, you know, to see what we can do, what we can learn, and it's also where they're situated. And some of the really lovely allotments, some of those allotment holders do actually have gardens. So I think it's spreading. I think site visits are really important, but it's just balancing it out and really looking what work we can do, and what support we can give initially to, you know, low performing areas, and also when we've also talking to the communities to identify where they think there are spaces that they could use, because sometimes the land is not owned by the council, but it's fenced off, and there is enough space to have some, you know, to grow. So it's the council engaging with the landlord. It might be a unit or, you know, a commercial unit. They don't need that stuff. So I think it's really having a mixed bag. And the other thing, of course, is going to the site visits. They need to be considered and done, you know, very, very soon, while, you know, while they're flourishing, while we can, and it's pretty obvious then with that we can see those that aren't working well, but because during the winter, you don't really see much, do you? And we don't want to go to site visiting like you have to on planning when it's really freezing.
Councillor Mohan, please.
In terms of potential visits to places, I think in terms of allotments, there is a big plot of allotments in south of Havelock Road. It's really big, and I think it will be worth exploring it. And also, we may get a kind of new flavor of the products there and people, the mix of community as well. I think it will be worth exploring.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's actually one very interesting point, because it's one thing that we were thinking about the Ealing Parks Foundation and the other work that we have been doing is that really reaching out to Southall, because it's really important that that we all across the borough feel included in this. And so I think it's a good idea to maybe talk, because sometimes Southall gets forgotten about when we're talking about those kind of issues. So yes, and Mr. Carter.
I mean, it's a great point about Bixley Fields in Southall, because it's got the potential to be a superb site, and isn't at the moment. But you know, taking your point, you know, there's probably a really good place to go and see how things could be improved. You know, with a view to it being a really high performing place, because it's got all of the essential ingredients. Yeah. It just needs a slight change of direction. But the other point I wanted to make, just thinking about your point about rewilding non-council owned spaces, there's a lot happening in Hounslow and a little bit in Sudbury as well, I've seen, where local organisations almost guerrilla garden forgotten spaces. So around Chiswick Town Hall, for example, or down by the railway station, you'll see some corners there where people have just moved in unilaterally, and now with the support of the council, with Hounslow Council, to really brighten up. And some of those could be growing spaces, edible growing spaces. I mean, they tend to be more aesthetic planting, just to kind of make people feel good, but they could be edible spaces as well. So I think, you know, again, we've got on our doorstep, we've got people who are doing the things that we perhaps ought to be thinking about trying to promote within our borough as well.
That's excellent. So I think we all agree that allotments are a good idea. I mean, I would say that looking at the list there, I think around Horston Hill and looking at what's going on in terms of actual animal wildlife as well, that's something that's going to be very essential. You know, I think that's quite fundamental to looking at the biodiversity action plan. So I think we'll have to look at something like that. I will just like declare an interest there that I basically live 5 minutes away from Horsenden Hill, so it's a short walk for me, but that's not my only consideration here. So, okay, so all right, in that case, I think we've got some good ideas there. We know where we're going with that. So I think maybe we should just move on to our presentation. We've got Chris Welsh, who's here to speak to us today virtually online, and just to give us some kind of overview of where we've been already with this work, and where we're up to, and we can maybe just have a look at what we've achieved already, and then before we then look at what we can move forward with. So Chris, if you're ready, if you're able to, I don't know if you. Oh.
Yes, thank you. Just
brilliant, lovely.
Waiting for video to.
Thank you then, Chris. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. A lot of good discussion there. It's quite interesting. I'll try and pick up as much of it as I can through the presentation. But one of the things discussing with Chris Bunting that we wanted to make sure that we tried to capture in this was appropriate definitions of rewilding, regrow, recycling. And thankfully, most of it were already covered within documents we've created. So on the second page, we were able to extract it from the BAP that was signed off earlier this year, where we leave spaces unmanaged for nature to revert back to its natural processes. I'll pick up some of that as well, because we've been doing that in Ealing since 2015, taking a decision to not groom things to the same extent that we typically do within municipal sites in the way that contractors are used to grooming things. So It's been a long journey, but it's led us in the right direction. Regrow, which has been picked up on food growing as sort of defined in the climate ecology and emergency strategy. It's a way we can interact with the environment, and offers a unique opportunity to place ourselves within the ecosystem. There's a lot of possible education opportunities there as well. With regards to children, I think children probably have more of a grasp than some adults do on exactly the food chain and where food comes from, and appreciation for that. And not necessarily my domain, but an area obviously that we have some impact on is recycling. And it covers not just our waste collection recycling, but all assets, and how we make sure that we can extend lifespans and reuse as much as we possibly can. And throughout the last year, we've achieved some very good standards. We've been very successful with tree planting grant funding, and a partnership with Trees for Cities, and have been successful as one of the tree cities of the world for the last few years as well. Some very successful campaigns through tree planting. As mentioned earlier, the Biodiversity Action Plan is now active, and also through external accreditation through London and Bloom and Green Flag Awards. We've succeeded more every year through those means, and had feedbacks from people outside of the borough, which I think is valuable as well. So to pick up on rewilding, 2017, we did start in small areas in 2015, but more actively by 2017. We worked in ways largely where we want to reduce mechanical mowing and compaction underneath our tree canopies. So we started letting grass grow long underneath all of our canopies. And then we started utilizing some funding that we had at the time to introduce wildflower meadows, and really start to enhance nature and the opportunities that we've had through there. We certainly had our challenges. There were a lot of people who were complaining about staying in dog mess or not being able to allow their dogs off on lead. Dogs were a big concern, particularly with woodland grass. And it took us probably 3 years before we were finally able to convince people and justify the reason that we were doing it, by moving back to a more natural environment. And as such, since then, we've changed dozens of hectares now across the borough, where previously mown grass is now wildflower meadows in different habitats. Other examples, which you mentioned, was one of the sites we might visit, was the Greenford to Grinnell Greenway, which is a stunning example of habitats, but also being able to clean up waterways. And we've done a series at Lammas Park is another one as well, where we've introduced swales and sort of overflow water habitats to not only create new environments, but it also alleviates flooding issues that reduced access on paths within the parks. So co-benefit from that perspective. So similar to SUD schemes as well, which we've started to implement across the borough collectively with our highways colleagues. Hedgerows and again trees. Previous manifesto commitment was to plant 30,000, which we achieved by planting 37,000 in the previous 4 years. And new manifesto commitment to plant 50,000 trees prior to within the next 4 years. Other things we've been looking at as well, we've actively reduced our use of chemicals, weed control. There's always discussions around trying to get rid of chemicals completely, but it's challenging in a borough that has so much natural body courses. So we have giant hogweed and will always have giant hogweed unless we can convince other councils further upstream to really manage their giant hogweed issues, because they've come down and they bed into our side of the borough. And as much as we can do manually, chemicals are the most effective to ensure that the public is safe. So invasive species always we have a need for some form of chemical, but it's the more aesthetic use, trying to get rid of weeds and beds on paving and things like that, where we've drastically reduced that so far. And a shout out to Tony and Parks for London, who have created the integrated weed management plan template, which we are working on at the moment, and intend to have that complete by the end of 2022, in a way of quantifying and also indicating with crews and other people that use the chemicals and finding other means in order to reduce our chemical use. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the creation of the Biodiversity Action Plan and Climate Ecology Emergency Strategy, which will guide us through the next 4 years and beyond. A few examples as well on the next slide. Flower meadows, and some interpretation that we did at the time. We redid our park signage 3 or 4 years ago on some key sites. So Ravener Park was exactly one of those projects where we had previously cut all grass down to amenity level, so below 100 mil, and planted in some meadows, and it really changed the character of those sites. So along the on Oxford Road outside the Ealing Hospital, we've let that grow as well. And a few more examples of work done by the Ealing Wildlife Group with regards to the harvest release in Horsenden Hill. So we've changed the way that we manage the meadows within Horsenden Hill to allow the
video
release of harvest.
It's actually cutting out a little bit to us, Chris. So I don't know if you've got much more to say, or is it easier not to have the video on or something to
Sorry.
it helps with the sorry.
Yeah, I can turn the video off. That's helpful. Sorry. And then an example there of Marnham Fields, where in tandem with Trees for Cities, we planted 20,000 trees in Marnham Fields 4 years ago now, probably. And then an example in Walpole Park, some amenity planting as part of the HLF project there. Again, another example is what I referred to previously, where the Green for Grinnell scheme within Paraval Park and Longfield Avenue. You can see the before picture on the left and the after picture on the right, where we were diverting existing sewers and ditches through our parkland to create new habitats and wildflower meadows. Similarly, within Lammas Park, the same sort of project, which is actually used as a case study in a GLA guide for SUDs in parks and open spaces. So good recognition for the landscape team there within the Parks Department. Then moving on to Regrow, we have over 2,000 tenants who have allotment plots within Ealing, supported by food growing opportunities with various organizations. So Artification in North Acton Playing Fields, Mind Foods have plots across a few sites, Cleveley Crescent in Acton, as well as at Horsenden Hill, and Apple we've supported with some of their food growing initiatives in Acton Park as well, just to name a few. Ealing Allotment Partnership have taken on Cultivating Ealing, which was previously Ealing in Bloom, which is a judged process, but there's a lot of lessons learned and advice for others that happens as part of that, and it's good to see that continue with renewed enthusiasm to get not just allotment tenants and people in their own home, but schools as well has been a big focus and will be moving forward. We've had several groups plant fruit trees across the borough, Ealing Transition, and the Hanwell and Norwood Green Orchard Trail have planted several hundred alone and maintain and manage those trees. But I think, yeah, there's other elements as well, particularly around the regrowing, where as a service we are extremely reliant upon volunteers. We have no more dedicated staff within Ealing for allotments or anything to do with food growing. It's following a restructure. It's landed with existing staff to try and push things forward. So there's been more dependency upon volunteers, and I am constantly amazed at the enthusiasm and dedication that volunteers have. They have only helped sustain what we had previously, but we are flourishing, really, considering the lack of council, admin, and officer support that we've been able to provide over the past 5 years. And one of those examples, again, is volunteer sessions being led at Walpole Park Walled Garden. And then education sessions as well. We've had a previous post at Walpole Park that was funded through the HLF project, delivered for schools and food growing sessions. And the Ealing Parks Foundation has funded a continuation of that during certain times. So, and Ealing Wildlife Group have partnered with educational sessions with regards to locally grown and food source. Some examples here as well. I know we've talked about schools before, but Trees for Cities developed an edible playground in Blair Peach Primary in Southall. Again, an edible Acton, which I mentioned before, Artification have developed in North Acton playing fields in a disused, well, a former Bowles Green outside the pavilion that they have the lease to. Picture of the wall garden in Walpole Park, and a photograph of the Nepalese community that visit Horsenden Farm twice a week during the growing season. And then if you haven't visited, not that you might need to visit through this, but the Horsenden Grape and Honey Farm was an idea of growing grapes along a perfectly south-facing slope that was overgrown and left to its own devices, and has become a very popular spot for community activity as part of the Horsenden Horticultural Association that manage 3 allotment sites across the north of Greenford. And finally, as I said before, this isn't necessarily my area of expertise, but we do have some link in here, obviously, with our colleagues in waste. Ealing is one of the top performing boroughs with regards to recycling at 49% a few years ago. There is a greater push to increase that number. And supporting community groups and services for litter picking, such as Logger Can, which is a group of volunteers, close to 2,000 strong that are out there every day, litter picking across the borough. So looking at how we can modify our infrastructure in order to ensure that we can help recycle what they are collecting. The library things, which is linked to the ecology emergency strategy and being developed through that. Recycling repairs initiatives, for example, the Let's Go Celto program, where we're looking at repairing bikes as opposed to throwing them out. We're collecting them from waste authorities, the West London Waste Authority, to give them a new lease of life and encourage people to cycle and use more active travel methods. And then exploring options for circular economy hub. Again, that's linked into the ecology strategy and emergency climate emergency strategy. And a service level update for Ealing's reduction, reuse, and recycling plan. As I said before, volunteers are a massive contribution on where we have and what we have been able to achieve over the last 5 to 7 years. A few of them noted there that are stepping up to the plate, coming to us with new ideas and how we can manage, how they can help us manage things differently and try and resolve as much as we can and move towards the target of zero carbon by 2030 and achieve as many environmentally derived initiatives as we possibly can. That's concludes what I've got in my presentation, but obviously happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much then, Chris. Just thinking at this stage, and we haven't heard from Tony Leach yet. I don't know, Tony, if you've got any kind of thoughts already of what you've already heard that you perhaps want to add this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I hope you can hear me loud and clear. What I was going to say is that Parks for London is a charity that works across London, and part of what we do is to produce an annual audit of all the boroughs measured against 10 criteria of how their parks are doing. And I can share my screen. I'm not got a long presentation at all. It's not even a presentation, but I thought if you've got screens, this might help you. Is that okay, Chair?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just gosh, I'm not used to using Zoom. So here we go and share. So hopefully you can see this, which is...
We can, yes, thank you.
Brilliant. So this is in our resources hub, which is about good parks for London. I won't go into detail about it, but we've been running it since 2017. The thing that most elected members are interested about is how their borough is doing in comparison with other boroughs against the 10 criteria. And I can just reassure councillors today that your borough is always in the top half, and it's edging more and more towards the top quartile. And in reference to today's topic that you're honing down on, rewild, regrow, recycle, it actually crosses a number of the 10 criteria that we gather data on, those being health, fitness and well-being, where we look at food growing, in nature, which is about how you're managing your assets, and I know you're going to look at biodiversity action plans in the future, and sustainability, where we ask about what kind of kit are you using, what kind of recycling are you doing, etc. And I'll just pull up, hopefully you can see this. This is a feedback report from last year's scores of how Ealing has done. And you'll see the darker the green, the higher the scoring, the better the performing the borough is. And Ealing, in comparison with our boroughs, is doing very well. It's in terms of its parks services, its strongest area is in collaboration. But it's also in there are the areas that I've mentioned already, which covers the topics that you're looking at this evening. So Chris has already illustrated your food growing, community food growing activities, which goes beyond traditional allotments. And the other thing I want, so you're doing well in those areas. They're not areas that you need to sort of just lay on your laurels. There are other areas which need more attention, but I'm picking those up with the two Chris's in your service. But for example, back in 2020, we did a case study on Ealing, all about sustainability, which was timely in that that's when you made the decision to bring the maintenance contract, grounds maintenance contract, back in-house. And that gave you the ability to buy green equipment, which then is making a huge difference to the way your carbon footprint is measured. and also you're equipping staff with electric or battery operated handheld equipment, which is lighter, has less vibration, less noisy. So you certainly have done well there. And compared with Lambeth, you in the year of 2020, you were doing very, very well. And then I think the last thing I was going to share, oh no, that's this meeting, don't want to cut us off. So those were the main things I just wanted to share with you. And just to, we're actually processing the figures for this year's Good Parks for London. And I can't give anything away at this stage, I'm afraid. But just to say that compared to other boroughs, you are in a good position, and I don't have concerns, and I would express those to this scrutiny panel if I did, about the whole area of rewilding, regrowing and recycling. So unless you've got any further questions, or unless you've got questions, I'll let you proceed. And I'll try and find how to unshare, because I haven't used this for ages. So just bear with me.
Okay, oh, thank you very much then, Tony Leach. I think that's really helpful and very encouraging that so far things are going well. So I was actually quite relieved to hear that. So thank you. So I think I'll just maybe open it up to the panel and see if there are any questions for Chris or for Tony, please. Oh, Councillor Mohan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few general comments and observations to share with colleagues here. We are undoubtedly doing some great work in terms of tree plantation. Well done. That's really very obvious. We have achieved a lot, and we are going to achieve a lot, as the manifesto says. In terms of involving people more in tree plantation and in this field, I think there are a few suggestions. For example, people are happy to plant a tree in the memory of their loved ones. But I personally feel that the cost for a tree plantation for a family is quite high. It's something like 600 to 700. I think we need to revisit this to encourage people. This price should be sort of subsidized, or sort of, we can use any term. Similarly, I think there will be people who will be more than happy to plant a tree in their private garden if we encourage them. So these are the two fields, I think, where we can achieve more. It will be kind of involving people. I heard something about adopted tree, this term some time ago, or maybe it was something to do with if you can water a few trees in your neighborhood. For example, now it's the heat wave going on. So people sort of, if that can be kind of encouraged, like people's involvement increased, that will be really good. Finally, indeed, we have planted very many fruit trees, like in the wild, if you like, for people to consume them. But in my observation of the trees I have seen, or the parks I have visited, after care work sort of has not been really of great standard. These trees could do with more attention. The tree is there, the trees are there, but they weren't to my observation, weren't really properly looked after. I think if we can look into these suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mohan. We do have our third meeting of this panel. We'll be looking specifically at trees. So hopefully we'll get a few more answers then as to how we can look after them properly. And but in the meantime, are there any comments that maybe I should bring another question. Maybe Councillor Conti, if you want to ask another question, then we'll go back to answers. Thanks.
I just had a couple of questions. One on recycling. I was reading something recently about how, particularly in London, a lot of the recycled stuff that we send for recycling, we expect that's being recycled actually doesn't end up being recycled. And there's, I think sometimes even a third or close to 50% doesn't end up being recycled, ends up being incinerated. I was just wondering what that number is in Ealing. And I guess if it's high, what can we do to better educate people in terms of so not to contaminate their recycling, especially given that it's all mixed together and we're not separating out. So I was just curious on that point. Then in terms of reduced chemicals for weed control, I was just wondering what is being used instead, just out of curiosity, because I've seen them out, in between pavements with the, spraying. I was wondering, what are they spraying if it's not chemical weed killer? And then the other point sort of about rewilding, I sort of learned a lot about this recently because there was an area on Clarendon Road that was lots of overgrown grass on the verge of the middle, and I'd asked the council to come and they cut it all up. And then on social media, I was like, oh, that's great that we've cleared that up. There was a whole thing about, no, you've got to allow this to be rewild, etc. And I hadn't thought about that. So that was definitely a learning curve. But I guess the serious point I was making on that is that in terms of where we're leaving areas to rewild, actually, how do we educate the community as well in terms of ensuring that, okay, so you've got grass verges and people are used to those being trimmed and cut and making sure that they're all look very neat and pristine. If, what the council's plan is, and obviously the wider agenda in terms of rewild is actually to leave those to be a bit more, I don't know what the right word is, but wild, then how do you balance that? How do you educate residents as a whole in terms of ensuring they understand the reasons that those things are being done? And it's not just the stuff's being left to look a bit scruffy, which maybe is what the perception is sometimes.
Councillor Crawford, please.
Well, just to add to that, I welcome the rewilding and letting the verges go, but there's a real issue where it needs to be done in partnership with the maintenance, the street services, because those grasses don't collect the litter, and you see that in the roads as well. So we have to balance this out, and more work needs to be done. So unfortunately, there needs to be more work with the community, because I found the Parks Department very good at supporting communities. They'll do the planting, they'll set it up on condition, which I fully support, and I tell the residents they have to maintain it, but they're not taking what litter, because these grasses are quite beautiful. So it depends where it is, but I think we need to look at how they collect the litter, and also when they grow, when they've sort of grown over. Some plants are fantastic when they grow. They almost die. I paint them at that stage, but they can, as you said, it can look really messy, and we've seen what the weather has done. Flowers, hydrangeas, which have had no protection, they've just shriveled up. So we need to be looking at what we are planting, and also probably educating people. And finally, we need to get people to grow in their front gardens that bit more. And that message hopefully has to go to planning. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So I don't know if Chris or Tony want to come back on any points of that. Perhaps Chris firstly. Thank you.
Yes, happy to. In fact, I meant to mention it in my presentation, and I forgot to. But before we started, the previous comments made by Councillor Conti around planning and Councillor Crawford and Councillor Taylor around housing and increase biodiversity there. It is definitely an area we can focus more attention on in the next meeting with regards to the biodiversity action plan, because both planning and housing estates are referenced within the BAP. So we can pick that up in more detail at the next meeting. To pick up a few comments from Councillor Mohan, memorial tree planting in the avenue. In order to do that, we are looking at the moment. The majority of the cost is because you get a plaque and a tree, and the plaque's just as expensive as the tree. And that's largely where the majority of the cost comes from. Plus, we pay the contractor to water them for 2 years as well as part of an aftercare maintenance package. But I'll take that back to the tree team and have a look. It kind of rings tune to what Councillor Crawford was saying as well, Councillor Mohan, where there is certainly inconsistencies depending on the group that we're working with regard to aftercare. Some are far better than others, and some certainly need more support. And it's challenging with a stretch service to be able to offer as much support as some of them do need. So perhaps there's more around education on exactly what is entailed when a community come to us with an idea, for them to understand exactly the time commitment and resource commitment that's required in order to look after some of these spaces. We've done similar in allotments where the Ealing Allotment Partnership essentially put together a guide and a questionnaire that when people apply for an allotment, there is a half page that essentially tells you this isn't going to be easy. This is going to take time and commitment and dedication. And do you actually have that now? So maybe there's something we can put together that's provides people with a little snapshot on exactly what's required and involved. On that note, kind of leading into Councillor Conti's question around how do we inform residents of rewilding initiatives, I will be the first to put my hand up for the entire service to say comms is probably something we struggle with the most. Having the time to stop and be able to write up stuff in addition to a lot of the things that we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis is challenging. And a lot of times we don't try and reach out as much as we probably should, but there's certainly a resource implication there that is challenging for the service. However, there is probably an easier answer to that, an easier solution where we can utilize the website better, have things there that's readily available that, in fact, I believe it's Sutton, Tony, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, has a very good breakdown on how they manage verges. They have 3 web pages that easily breaks out in urban areas. This is how we manage verges. In these areas, this is how we manage them. Where grass is grown longer, it's cut so many times a year. And then we have other verges where they're treated in more rural conditions, which would apply to the verges in Ealing. But at present, we've not had an opportunity to or the time to put something like that together. So there's certainly something around comms that can be done. And then finally, the last point to pick up on, Councillor Conti, with regards to chemical use, it's changing the way that we maintain a lot of things. So actively, when the new tree contract was tendered 6 years ago now, we opened up one of our sort of disused depots in the borough for them, because they travel quite a distance. It was more economical for them to be able to offload their wood chip within our site. So we utilized that wood chip for bedding on housing sites and park sites, which suppresses weed growth. So just simply, rather than having to buy it in, so utilizing waste and being able to recycle that product rather than it going off to some depot, which then probably goes to an incinerator somewhere. We can utilize the waste product of tree works throughout the year, which then goes down to help us reduce chemical use and suppress weed growth. So that's just an example on where over the last few years we've been able to reduce previous chemical use. Hopefully that covers most of the comments made.
Right. Thank you, Chris. I don't know if there are any more questions that anyone wants to ask at this stage. So, I mean, maybe what I can ask about is just trying to look back at the kind of history as to how we've become quite so interested and quite so proactive about what we're doing when it comes to biodiversity. Because from what I was looking at, it seemed that in this country we had a national biodiversity plan from 1994, which just seemed like quite revolutionary, because it was one of the few countries that really were doing something about this. But then it just seems to have really kind of fizzled out by about 2000, that we weren't really looking forward as a country and didn't really seem to have anything that I can find to say that what we're actually doing, what we're pursuing, what we're ensuring that we do in order to make things better in the country. But at the same time, the EU is actually looking quite proactively at this stage and actually really on the ball when it comes to looking at this in terms of the climate emergency, in terms of the potential for food shortages. And these are the kind of issues that are really quite prescient right now. They're really quite crucial issues. So I just wondered really, how much are we really doing to work together with central government? How much kind of support and help are we getting, and what are we really doing together? Because there's only so much we can really do as a council. We need more national, more international work going on. So what is it that we're doing on that basis to work elsewhere as well? Thank you.
In my view, I would probably say our collective working with central government is limited, and even some of the initiatives that they've put together, the funding is woefully inadequate. It's a token gesture. We've had a few projects where we have been able, some small grants, 25,000 here and there, with the Pocket Park scheme that they had a few years ago. In fact, the honey farm was a recipient of that. But when you consider the challenges that we all face across the country, it really didn't do much. It was more, in my mind anyway, it was more of a PR push. I think from a service level anyway, it was recognizing that across our service we have quite a few people with either high-level horticultural degrees or environmental science degrees, and trying to simply change and look at other countries. One of our colleagues was always very jealous at what happens in Paris with regards to very small roadside plots being adopted through some sort of guerrilla gardening. The recognition that weeds are okay. Curbside weeds, are not a big deal. You don't need to spray everything off. So looking at sort of high level thinking, where we don't necessarily need to keep doing the same thing every year. We need to start changing the way that we do it. So we started small in 2015 and continued to tweak things up to today. So I think it's a concerted effort, and obviously through Tony and the London Parks Benchmarking Group, more and more services, and even through budget cuts, we've had to think of how we can do things differently. And in some ways, the changes that we're doing actually do reduce the resource that's required from a maintenance perspective. So there's probably a myriad of avenues that have sort of led us down this path. And the hardest thing to do was probably to convince the public, and they now more than ever are behind it. And that's evident through the membership numbers of the Ealing Wildlife Group and LoggerCan and other organizations that are voluntary and are growing what feels like exponentially, considering where they were 4 or 5 years ago.
Thank you. And talking about groups such as Lagercan, they're incredibly good at actually getting out there and finding volunteers and just really reaching out and to making their work grow within itself. Because I've actually been quite envious, because I know that we used to, in my ward before COVID, as councillors, we were getting together groups of residents in order to go out on litter picks, and we never managed to get quite the same numbers as Lagercan. So it's actually something that's quite of interest to me, is how much work are we actually doing as a council to support that, in terms of saying that for maybe our voluntary organisations, and just saying how much outreach we're doing to bring people in, bring local residents in to do more, to actually just help out when it comes to litter picks, when it comes to working in the parks and any other work that you've mentioned, such as Trees for Cities. How much are we doing to support other organisations that are in there helping us? Thank you.
I would say we do everything we possibly can to support. Finances are always challenging, but where we can offer our support, we do. And there's a delicate balance between the council getting almost too involved, in the sense that it becomes council led, because I think people are much more responsive to being able to join an initiative that is community led. So we will support an initiative, but we have found that there is a better success within that initiative if the council isn't, obviously we're a partner, but we are not the lead partner within that initiative. So we, with Lagercan, for example, if a resident wants a litter picker, we will buy them a litter picker. We've branded blue bags for Lagercan so that they can distinguish bags that Lagercan pick. So very subtle things that encourage people that this is a community culture shift movement, and they are part of something wider as part of a community, as opposed to an initiative that is driven through the council, which Lagercan is. It is not something that was developed. We had ideas of trying to get people to try and look after litter more, but Keith Regard, who came up with Lagercan years ago because he was annoyed at all the cans of lager that were around Brent Lodge Park, started asking us to help him support with picking up bags and running events and getting infrastructure. So we have committed to do that, but there is a delicate balance, as I said, around how involved we get, because we seem to find more people get more people will sign up when they feel like they are part of that community initiative.
Thank you. And I think Councillor Taylor had a question.
Yeah, it's about parks actually, so I don't know who's going to answer. It's kind of alluded to earlier. Clearly the pandemic sort of massive increase in our parks, and I'm wondering what challenges that presented, both the council and state of the parks as well, and if there's any data around usage. I still think Acton Park is still much more busy than it was pre-pandemic, but it was obviously full on during the lockdown itself. And there's another one which is always controversial for politicians. It's about dogs in parks, because we often get asked about this, and I don't know what the answer is. I'm not giving an answer, but dog fouling in parks, and that puts off people, using the parks sometimes as well. And what's the view of a possible sectioned area?
Thank you. Welcome you back, Chris. Thanks.
Yes, dogs. I'll pick up on your first point. So usage has increased. The one way we've been able to evidence that was through litter. We anticipate usage was up during the pandemic 200 to 250% from previous years, based on the data that we had. It has relatively sustained, and I'm not going to get the term right, but yesterday I joined a live feed of, bear with me. It was an update on the still government review of parks. And organizations were there who advised that they carried out some studies that were saying the number of people, percentage of using parks during the pandemic has dropped a single percentage, so that the sustained increased use is still what was down those times. So one of the challenges is litter, and in fact, that's the reason Lagercan has grown as quickly as it has, because as soon as we hit peak summertime in 2020, Lagercan, if you remember, nearly 1,000 months as a response to how people were treating others' local neighborhood, and instead of complaining to us about it, they started doing something themselves about it, and putting up signs to say this is litter picked by volunteers, etc. Wear and tear has increased. Our assets are depreciating quicker as well as a result of that. So that is a juggling challenge that we have. But they're there to use, so it's a service challenge. But thankfully, some volunteers are helping us manage those challenges that we have. Dog fouling is a challenge because if you didn't own a dog before lockdown, most people seem to go out and get one. So there is a vast number of new dog owners, and we had many challenging behaviors that we tried to address in that initial summer period with regards to how to look after dogs. So we worked with Park Guard to run some dog training programs in some of our parks where we were able to find some spare funding. But there's probably obviously always more that can be done from that perspective. And we're working closely with the enforcement team where we know we've got particular sites that are of issue. So we're trying as best we can with the resource that we have to try and manage that, but it was a negative impact as well to litter as a result of the pandemic increase in usage.
Great, thank you. At this stage, if I could perhaps invite Paul Carter, if he's got anything he'd like to add to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I was going to make a point actually, just to follow up with what Chris has said, because I think one of the kind of overarching points that's come out of almost all of the conversation today is the complete reliance of this whole program on volunteers. And that can be volunteers within established groups like the ones that we've been talking about. There's some very successful ones like Ealing Wildlife Group and Lagercan. But actually, I mean, allotments too, right at the forefront of active citizenship. There are 45 allotment sites across the borough between 2,000 and 2,500 tenants. The whole network there is supported by volunteers who run. And just kind of picking up on something that Chris was just saying there, I think that as we're moving towards a much greater reliance on volunteers, whether it be for watering or street maintenance or litter, whatever it is, we do need to reconsider what that relationship is between council and those local community groups and volunteers. Because on the one hand, council support can be very energizing, as we've seen it work very successfully, but equally it can be very dragging. So volunteers that are working with objectives where they're not getting even the minimum level of support. So I'm not talking about the council doing things here. I'm talking about the council facilitating the volunteers to be able to perform the things which their enthusiasm is taking them to want to deliver. And unless there's a kind of minimum standard in those situations, then the volunteers will lose heart. And I've seen quite a lot of that over the last couple of years. So I think there's a fundamental conversation in here about active citizenship and how we can enthuse volunteers and liberate them so that they can get off and do the successful things that some of the groups will do. And that will certainly involve the council letting go in certain areas. And that's a good thing, I think, generally. But it means that we do need to reconsider what those relationships look like and what the volunteer groups need in order to be able to succeed. And then I think you get to a very different sort of world, and you get, you know, I've mentioned already Kensington and Chelsea and Hounslow as neighbouring boroughs where some very active community groups are operating. And the council are full behind that, but the actual day-to-day activity of those groups is by the groups, the volunteers themselves. So the council are very much facilitating the local enthusiasm. And that's the kind of model that we need to be driving to much more, I think. And whether that's maintenance of trees on streets, you know, residents shouldn't feel that they're not allowed to go out and water the trees outside their houses, even if they see them dying, because it's somebody else's job to look after it. I mean, residents should be feeling that they've got the initiative, they've got the even maybe the social responsibility to go out and do those things. And so I think there's a whole kind of big picture conversation in relation to the council and the volunteer network. The other thing, in relation to that as well, if we think that there's probably something like 170, 180 parks within the borough, depends how you define park, only a handful of those have got recognised friends groups that support them. Now, friends groups don't appeal to everybody, I absolutely understand that. And again, maybe we need to be thinking about how we can redefine the kind of concept of local ownership of some of the green spaces. So maybe supporters is a better term than friends group. Maybe it has less of a kind of a committee kind of dimension to it. But certainly that kind of engagement with the local communities, so that the parks then are meeting, you know, understand and are meeting the needs of the local communities rather than just doing the things which they've always done. I think again will go a long way to drawing in the local residents who actually kind of feel then that you know, the parks are about what they do, rather than they've got some capability to be able to influence how the parks are used, rather than they're just there and they kind of enjoy them in their current state. So again, I think there's a kind of switch that we can push. I think there's lots of enthusiasm out there, but there's a conversation about how we kind of make that happen, and redefine our program of engagement or communication, as Chris was saying, because I think there's some big dividends that can come out of that. And then the last thing I just wanted to say was around food miles, because we've picked it up in a number of different areas. You know, we've got a lot of green spaces. I mean, certainly if you add in front gardens, community gardens, forgotten spaces, a lot of places where edible products can be produced. I mean, and I'm not even mentioning allotments at this stage. One of the things that we found with allotments, where we've increasingly tried to set ourselves the goal that that no produce is left wasted on allotment sites, and we're still a long way from that. You walk around any allotment site in September and you see lots of rotting produce. But if we set ourselves the target of not having anything wasted, and we have a number of organisations, as we have around the borough, who are willing to take fresh fruit and vegetables. So that can be the Ealing Food Bank, Southall Food Hub. There's a new South Ealing community food cupboard. I mean, lots of organisations, lots of Gurdwaras, lots of organisations will take fresh fruit and vegetable, but there's a logistic challenge of how do you get it from where it's being grown to the places that can use it. And that's an issue for allotments, but equally it's an issue for anybody who wants to, you know, do a little bit of growing in their front garden, for example. Or if there's a corner of the street which has got some growing space which nobody is using and wants to plant some tomatoes and courgettes kind of each year, how do they then get to whoever's going to use them? So there's that little logistic challenge which is quite tricky. But again, if we were able to find a way of easily enabling people who are growing things to get to them, fruit on fruit trees as well, if we planted more fruit trees around the borough, how do we get that produce to the people who can use it? And again, there's a big gain that we can make, I think, in trying to tackle that question in particular. And you know, there's a big demand for fresh fruit and vegetable around the borough as well. So those are probably the three things I wanted to just comment on.
Yeah, thank you. Just to come back on a couple of points, I was just thinking your last one about how you get it from people who are growing the food, where they get to. What's the practical issue? Are you talking about transport? Is that what you mean?
So you've got a front garden, you've got 2 courgette plants, and you live half a mile from Southall Food Hub, you know, and you've got a courgette that grows. Do you pick it and then walk half a mile and hope that there's somebody there that you can give it to? So somewhere in my head anyway, there's this idea of a kind of network of collection boxes around the borough. You know, maybe based on churches, it may be based on public spaces where people can leave, and it needs to be regularly collected because it's perishable, of course, a lot of this stuff. But yeah, it's just that logistic thing of, because it's just a barrier to doing something. You know, if you've got some produce which could be used and you're not going to use it yourself, how do you get it to somebody who can use it? And those who are, you know, fully motivated will obviously make the effort, but lots of people won't, and that's the cause of a lot of wasted produce, I would say, around the borough.
The other thing, I might have 1 or 2 ideas, but I'll think them through. But the other thing was just around friends groups. Now, and and I don't know the answer to this one, is, you know, we've got parts there, like my ward in Council Corporate called East Hampton, we've got high level private renting. So a lot of people don't have an interest, if you like, in their area. And I'm just wondering if some of the friends group exists in areas where there's a high level of home ownership and stable occupation, as opposed to those with high level private renting, and maybe that's a challenge.
It would be an interesting Venn diagram, wouldn't it? I haven't thought to. Yeah, I haven't thought to. I mean, an easy way to answer that would be I can give you a list of the, you know, half dozen or so friends groups, and we can just look and see where they are. But actually, maybe the temporal nature of a number of residents within particular geographical areas is a feature as well. People don't kind of put down the same routes perhaps they would if they were owner occupiers in locations, and maybe that creates a bit of resistance. But, you know, the flip of that, as COVID has told us, is that, you know, with more and more apartment flat multi-occupancy dwelling, you know, the premium for green spaces is going to be bigger and bigger. And so, you know, it's inconceivable that there isn't a demand for green spaces. It's just really a question of how you make that connection, I think. And friends groups are a traditional way of doing it. And my question really is whether that's really appropriate. Does that actually can capture, you know, the proper spread of the community? Are we reaching the people we would always have reached, or are we should we be doing some different things in order to get to people who perhaps have been a little bit outside of the loop on that?
Councillor Crawford, please.
I absolutely understand, because I have trees in my garden, and I hate to see waste, and I don't have a car. I don't want a car either. And the buses have changed, so it will take 2 or 3 bus rides to go to the estate, where really I know that a lot of people might use it. But then I have to think, well, do I go and put a notice up on the estate to say, I've got loads and loads of apples, do you want to cook? And then, rather than me being the councillor going around, because I won't get away with it because they know me, and handing out these apples. And I think it's the sharing of the produce, and whether it's going to a food bank or whatever. But what we could build on, I'm just thinking, is that fantastic work that our volunteers did through COVID, And all those volunteers, I bet a lot of them, would be really interested in, keeping up and dropping off fruit. I'm doing it in my street because I made contact with a few people, and they had rhubarb and kale and stuff, and they'll end up with sort of my apples. So I think it's almost like it's a domino effect, isn't it? And it's the kind of thing that we could actually be summing up, part of the recommendations. But we have to be careful because I think we might go over 5 recommendations.
Well, if anyone knew me from last year, they knew that I was quite okay about having more recommendations than I was originally briefed to create. I think we were told to do 6, I did about 17. But there's an awful lot we need to cover. But I think really I don't know how much we need to do tonight in terms of recommendations, because we haven't really gone that deep into subjects, but this is one thing we're definitely going to have to carry over into the next meeting, I think, and beyond. It is that looking at what we can do to work together with other groups, to work together with our communities. That's what I was trying to ask the question about, but really it's a case of how can we look at those other issues, such as the transportation, that maybe it doesn't really occur to a lot of us to think about that. So this is the kind of thing we need to do. What can the council do to bring all this together? And the one point that does actually come to my mind is speaking to someone actually just on the telephone who were just asking me about litter picking, because she tried litter picking 10 years previously in Ealing, and she'd actually got into trouble for it because we had an issue with that, people behaving like that, actually picking up some litter and putting it into a bin. And for some reason we had an issue. Now, I don't understand the histories of that, but that's what she said. But so what she wanted my help was in order to actually do some litter picking herself. So I did actually manage to arrange for her to have a litter picker stick, and the gloves and the bags from the council. And she had that brought round to her, and she was absolutely she was thrilled. She was just, the fact that she could actually go out and do something. So sometimes it's a case of how do we work together with our communities, allow them to understand what is available to them, and give them the opportunity to come forward and say, this is what they want to do, this is the support they need. So it's a lot that we can look at there, but we'll definitely carry an awful lot of this over into our more in-depth discussions. And so I just, I think that really probably does bring it to an end, really, I think, on that one. So thank you ever so much to everybody for coming out again on, as I say, on that warm evening to come out and contribute there. And so we just look forward to our next meeting on the 18th of October. And thank you very much again. Oh, okay. Pleasure. Yes, just anyone needs a bottle of water for the way home.